All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the groundbreaking career of Rita Moreno. As with some of my past programs like Mel Brooks, Martin Scorsese, John Waters, Billy D. Williams, please do not blame me if this person passes away within the next year. I have one coworker who still blames me for David Lynch passing away when Todd covered him. But as I like to remind my coworker, David Lynch was a very heavy smoker, and I think that had more to do with it than me doing a program on him. But with that, we're going to get started. So, who is Rita Moreno? I mean, I think if you're all here, you know who she is. She has been a staple of Hollywood since the 50s, which, like Cicely Tyson, worked most of her life pretty much up until the end. And I mean, something I think we can all hope for in our later days, had her faculties. But she is a singer, a dancer, an actress, one of the few performers to win an EGOT, which is an Emmy, Grammy, and Oscar and a Tony. Just a lot of people have won an EGOT, but usually it's the majority of people won, they are producers or they are musicians. Those are actually the two easiest ways to win an EGOT is be a producer or compose music. But Rita Moreno is one of the few who's won them all for performing roles. So that's a real feat. Also, I loved this picture. I think this was 2018, wore the same dress she accepted her Academy Award in. Um, my gosh, I could never. I'm not the same size I was like 10 years ago, let alone I don't know if I'll be able to do that when I'm her age, but more power to her. She has also described herself at one point as a girl who just decided to go for it, and that was the name of the documentary about her that came out earlier this decade. And she didn't invent that term. She said she like saw it on a shirt and bought it, and that described her. But as we'll go through it, she is someone who, when she decided she wanted to do something, she wanted a role, and she wanted this career, she would go for it, and she wouldn't stop until she got there. She is someone who really got to where she is by her, in some cases, many by luck. That's how most people get famous. But she had that drive and determination that really propelled her there. So, how did Rita Moreno's life start off? Well, she was born in Puerto Rico in uh, Humacao. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she was born in Rosa Dolores Alverio. And her mother called her Rosita. Her mother also called her Cookie. And she spent the first 5 years of her life in Puerto Rico, and she has really fond memories of there. She's like, it was always warm. I had a lot of family around me. She had grandparents, she had aunts and uncles. She had her father, who she doesn't have too many memories of, and she had a younger brother named Francisco. But all of that changed when she turned 5 years old. Her mother, who had left for a little while beforehand, and she didn't think much of it because number one, she was a child. Number two, she had enough other people around her watching her. But it turns out her mother was going to kind of scope out where they could live in New York City. So she comes back, and when she's 5, her mom takes her and she leaves behind everyone she knows in Puerto Rico. She leaves behind her grandparents, her biological father, and her brother Francisco. And she actually never ends up seeing Francisco again. And she still, in her memoir, has a lot of feelings about never being able to see him again. There's a lot of people that when she left Puerto Rico, she never got to see in person. Her mother, it doesn't sound like she quite cut ties, but it was very, I'm going to start a new life. Her mother was not a particular fan of her biological father, and Rita really wasn't either. Um, but coming to New York was an adjustment. Number one, it was the weather. This is someone who grew up in a more warm tropical climate, and all of a sudden she needs coats, and there's snow on the ground, and it was also a lot more polluted back then. These are so big adjustment, and also, even though they're in the Bronx and there is a Puerto Rican community there, she encounters racism in one of the first chapters of her book. She talks about being called a slur by somebody, which it doesn't even register to her at first if that's supposed to be a bad thing, but she could just tell by the tone of his voice, like, oh, this boy doesn't like me. Um, and she also does, like, I think a lot of people could potentially be resentful of their parents for uprooting them at a young age, moving them somewhere, having them leave their family and home behind. But Rita only, she understands her mother as an adult now in her memoir, and even in interviews, she's like, she was trying her best, but she also expresses a lot of admiration for her mother, going like, this is a woman who picked up, started somewhere new, and was able to support her and her daughter. She's like her mother sewed, she would do odd jobs. She would do what she could to keep a roof over the head, even though the place where they lived, there were mice, there were rats, I think there were bed bugs in one apartment. It wasn't the best place to live at first. But she even says, like, I think I got a lot of my tenacity from my mother because she was like, I am gonna go get out there and do this thing rather than just stay put. So when she's in New York, little did she know it, but she is afforded an opportunity that propels her to stardom. So when she's around 6 years old, one of her mother's friends says, oh, you should sign her up for dance class. And so the person she goes to is Paco Cancino. This is a man, he's both the teacher and the uncle of the great Rita Hayworth. So she also notes in her memoir that it was a big deal that's like, oh, he's Spanish, but he's from Spain. So there is a little bit of a difference. There's Spanish from Spain usually. There's a bit of a color difference. They're usually a little bit lighter skinned. They're whiter. They're a bit more European. They're also wealthier versus someone who's Spanish from Puerto Rico or a lot of Latin and South America, usually associated with being a little bit poorer, working a bit more working class jobs. And she discusses this, like, this is stuff like colorism, classism. These are things you find, it's global. You can find it in any culture. But she loves dancing, and Paco sees a talent in her, and he's even like, by the time she's 9, he's like, she is ready to go. And he takes her traveling on stage shows when she's 9 years old. And she also travels to perform as a teenager. And by herself in many cases, which she talks about having to take the trains and the subway alone, and she felt really scared. And so she decided to hitchhike to and from gigs, and she said, I did that until I had one awful experience. And what happened was this guy picks her up, pulls off the road, and she understands that she is in danger. And so what she starts to say is, um, I'm only 15. I'm only 15. I'm only 15. And if the man starts to go, well, you look older, and she just keeps going, no, I am under 18 years old. And he then drives her, drops her off, and she said at that point, she goes, after that, I put up with the train. I was not risking it again. And then she also noted, she goes, what really got me, even at a young age, was it wasn't me telling him to stop that got him to stop. It was me telling him that I was underage. So it was an eye-opening experience for her, and sadly kind of prepared her for other things that she would encounter. But she loved performing, and her mother was fully behind her. So she actually talks about how people would kind of perceive her mom being very behind her career. And one moment. Oh, unfortunately, I lost my page. But she talked about her mother and being like, this was not, she basically said, yes, I was a stage child. Yes, I was a child star, and my mother was a stage parent. However, this was something I chose for myself. She even has a line in her book where she's just like, oh, I had dancing and I had the lights and I had applause. Who needs school when you have that? She loved performing, and she's like, credit to my mother. Yes, she was a stage mother and managed me, but her mother also would make sure if she was around that her daughter was protected. Um, but unfortunately, as we'll get to in later slides, her mother was not around for everything. Around this time is when she chooses her name because, they said, "Oh, your name's too wordy." And, "Oh, Rosita." That's so when she goes to Hollywood, they're like, "Oh, Rosita. It's too wordy of a name." So she chooses Rita after Rita Hayworth, and the name Moreno came from the man her mother had married at the time, who Rita was actually not a huge fan of, but she figured, well, Rita Moreno sounds like a good name, and she said, she goes, at first I hated the last name, but now she's like, well, I have it, may as well. So when she finally goes to Hollywood, she signs with MGM, and this is in the late 40s, early 50s. And she's dubbed when she goes to see a casting agent, like, "Oh, you look like the Spanish Elizabeth Taylor." So contracts back then were you do X amount of films with us and us specifically. And the movies she got were, and she talks about it, not always the best films. Some of them she has a little more soft spot for, and she actually talks about So Young, So Bad. She goes, "Yeah, it's a little chintzy, it's a little bit of a B movie, but she's like, there's parts I like about it. I like my character. I like that my character is some kind of pathos." But she also unfortunately got a lot of the exotic maiden stereotype. And unfortunately, when she enters Hollywood, she also sees the bad side of Hollywood, which, I mean, thanks to the Me Too movement and what we've learned about Harvey Weinstein, it's a lot more out in the open now of how stuff operated. But for decades, there was stuff about the casting couches, and a lot of the way young starlets, especially, were exploited and abused were kind of kept under wraps. So, two incidents that happened to her when she's very young. 16, she's looking for an agent. And she doesn't even realize what's happening, but she is assaulted by her agent. And she talked about this in her documentary as well. She goes, "I almost like just blacked it out and ignored it for years because she really couldn't realize and understand what was happening to her, and some of it was denial." And in her documentary, when she told the story, she finishes it with going like, "You want to know what the real kicker is? I let him be my agent." But she just figured, she's like, "Okay, well, I need an agent to get a job." And she's just, again, she's like, "I just ignored it." I'm like, "Okay." Um, but she wasn't, see how to word this. Thankfully, she was able to protect herself, later on. So she talks about being kind of made to publicly date people, and that was something that was done a lot in old Hollywood. Um, I think a very famous example is Judy Garland was famously set up with Mickey Rooney. And there were a lot of people who were made to go on dates and be public couples just for the sake of publicity. So she was sent to a party. And it's like, okay, she'll go and she figured she'd go and date some young star. She goes to this party. It's nothing but old producers and directors. She just looks like, I don't want to get anywhere near these old men. And she starts to panic because she realizes, okay, I think I know what's happening. This is casting couch stuff, and I want no part of it. So she ends up able to get herself into a bathroom and lock the door. And when the coast is clear, she's able to get herself outside, and she sees people who are working landscapers. And she yells in Spanish, like, "Hey, can you help me? Can you give me a ride?" And they don't ask any questions, and they do. And she's just like, forever, she said, forever thankful for those people who did not ask questions, didn't pretend to ignore her, just took one look at her and said, "Yep, this girl wants to get out of here." So, despite those fairly traumatic early events, she still is able to kind of claw her way up to Hollywood stardom. So she gets little small roles. She gets to be in Singing in the Rain, which she has nothing but nice words to say about everyone involved in that. And in The King and I, even though she was like, "Well, I had to be painted up, and I'm not I'm not Southeast Asian," but she goes, "It was still a great role." And again, she, as she saw, she goes, "I had a character that had some kind of a story." And in 1954, she appears on the cover of Life magazine, and she did account. She says, "Found it funny the like an actress's catalog of sex and innocence," and she's like, "Really? That was not my life at that point." But she's like, "Well, they had to sell papers, and her being Latina, there was a stereotype there as well, which we will get to." So she kind of mentioned being in some of the exotic maiden roles. This unfortunately still happens. This is still debated now with women of color in roles, but way back in old Hollywood, it was even worse. Women of almost any ethnicity that wasn't white were very heavily stereotyped. So, very good example, Anna May Wong. She was kind of the seductive the seductive dragon lady. Um, Black women were usually made to be either the mammy stereotype or the very hypersexualized in many ways, but still ignorant, didn't know how to speak well. And if you were a woman who was Latina, you were put in usually a very hypersexualized role. Again, very stereotypical back then. And again, this is a good example of why it's not bad to have people of different backgrounds making movies because someone's there to go, hey, maybe this isn't great. But she had a lot of those exotic maiden roles. She actually called them the general ethnic, i.e., well, the role's not meant for a white person, so they'll take me. I look vaguely foreign, and they'll paint my face and tell me to put on a different accent. So she played women who were Indigenous Americans. She played women who were Southeast Asian. She played way more than Latina. I mean, again, she talks about working in The King and I, which is an acclaimed film and a very good movie, but she's still like, I had my face painted for it because they were making me into a race I wasn't. But she was also like, I'll take these jobs because I want to work, especially because her contract at MGM did run out. So for her, she's like, I will take these parts. So she took the Yellow Tomahawk, she took the Deer Slayer, and she's like, I will still give my all in these parts because it's what I have to do. And it's kind of a contrast to when we talked about Cicely Tyson last month, where she put her foot down and said, I would rather not work than take these jobs. But Rita, who really wanted to get a foot in the door, was just like, I'll do what I have to do. I'll give these characters some form of dignity and do the best job I can. Um, but that's how it was for a lot of not just young actresses of color, but just a lot of women in the industry. It was, do I want to roll? Do I want to get paid? I will do what I have to do. So during the 50s, she also meets the lust of her life. She eventually got married to a very nice doctor, and they spent decades together. Marlon Brando, she dated quite a few people, including at one point she dated Elvis Presley to make Marlon Brando jealous. And I love that she put this in writing in her memoir. She just said, honestly, Elvis didn't impress me. He seemed like a bit of a mama's boy. She's, not quite derisively with the mama's boy thing, but she's like, right deep down, I think he was still a bit of a small town boy, but I love just her going, Elvis didn't impress me. It's like Elvis in the 50s, the man every woman wanted. Uh, you gotta love the blunt honesty. But she met Marlon Brando, and he had actually seen her on that Life cover and was very enamored with her. And they had on again, off again for about 8 years. I think passionate would be a good way to put it, but tempestuous, and I think we would probably call this relationship toxic now. Um, I mean, she's in her memoir and in interviews still speaks in some ways very warmly of Marlon Brando. She said, like, the man was a great actor. She's like, he helped me with acting and he encouraged her to take better roles and said, like, you're better than these movies. She also talked about he was the first person to talk to her about the plight of Indigenous Americans, First Nations people, really got her more into politics. And she said in a way that wasn't condescending and not like a, oh, let's patting her on the head and telling her everything. It was more, he's like, oh, you should read these. Oh, in terms of opening up her mind to a lot of things. But he was also just, let's put it bluntly, and I think we know enough about Marlon Brando to not be surprised by this. He was not a very good partner. In one part of her book, she talks about a pregnancy. She gets pregnant by Marlon Brando. He's like, okay, well, we're not having it. Arranges for her to have an abortion, which is something when she talks about it now, she's like, oh, in retrospect, that was definitely for the best. But the person that he sent her to, this was back when it was illegal, did not do the job properly. She ended up having to go to a hospital, and thankfully her life was saved there. She didn't end up dying or hemorrhaging, or dying via hemorrhaging, and she didn't get any infections or sepsis or anything. Thankfully had enough money to just go, oh, just count this happened a lot back then. They'd say, just say it was a miscarriage, to avoid her getting any criminal charges. But Marlon Brando's first reaction, she says, is not, are you okay? It's a, oh, that doctor took my money. And she writes, like, his first thought wasn't even my health and well-being, it was that he had lost money. And that for her was kind of a real tell of like, I don't think I'm with a person who cares about me. And so later sometime later decides to take some sleeping pills and end her life. And a maid found her and rushed her to the hospital. And thankfully, she's here and she survived. And oddly enough, she goes to therapy, suggested by Marlon. The therapist that Marlon suggests to her says, you cannot see this man again. This will kill you. And she said he told the same thing to Marlon Brando, like, do not go near this woman. You are going to kill her. And to her credit, she did. She stayed away from him. She eventually became friendly with him. She would visit him when he got older and maintained a friendship. But she's like, I kept that guard up. I did not go. I kept thinking, like, I want to live. And so I am not rekindling my relationship with that man. So therapy ended up saving her. But West Side Story is something she said saved her as well. She literally has a chapter in her book that says "Saved by West Side Story." This was a movie that she wanted to be a part of because it was she goes, it was almost by chance because initially when West Side Story was being conceived, it was not even about Latinos. It would be about I believe it would be Jewish and Irish gangs. But they changed it to like your working class whites versus Puerto Rican immigrants. And she wanted the role of Anita. She was like, this is such a great character. She's got her own solo song. She dances. Um, and Rita's been a triple threat for most of her career. She can sing, she can dance, she can act. So she ended up getting the film role of Anita. She does talk about admiring Chita Rivera, who originated the role on Broadway. And she always kind of felt a little bad, like, oh no, I took the role. And apparently Chita was like, oh, when she got the role of the movie, I was a little mad. And then when she won the Oscar, I wanted to kill her. But they smoothed everything out. They're like, we understand it's mutual respect. But she loved making it. She liked being, again, being able to be a proud, strong Puerto Rican woman, and also kind of use her character, confront some of what she had as as someone who came from Puerto Rico to the United States as well. Um, that optimism, but also seeing, she had dealt with racism as well. That Anita deals with it too. Um, she does, however, talk about one of the one aspect she really did not like about this was, and she talks about being painted darker for her role. And she's just like, she goes, I understand it was the 60s. And at the time, Hollywood had a very limited view of what Puerto Rican was. And she goes, like, Puerto Rico is a place where you have people of multiple different shades and colors. There's Afro-Latinos, there's people who are almost white, there's people who are, you know, Anita's shade, but she said the fact that we were all painted darker, and again, in many cases, there are people who weren't even Latino playing Latinos. But she said that was the thing she didn't like, was being painted darker. And she's like, not that I don't have any problem with people darker skin, but she's just like, for her, it said it just showed the limited view they had of her homeland. But even with that, she ended up making history as the first Hispanic woman to win an Academy Award, and she was so shocked when she won, she just yelled, "I can't believe it," and I'll leave you with that. Unfortunately, similar to Cicely Tyson, the Oscar recognition does not always come with better roles. So, in an interview with the Miami Herald, she talked about before West Side Story, I was offered stereotypical Latina roles, the Conchitas, the Lolitas, and Westerns. I was always barefoot. It was humiliating, embarrassing stuff. But I did that because there was nothing else. After West Side Story, it was pretty much the same thing. A lot of gang stories. So after this, and also, she had been through a lot in about a 2 to 3 year period. She had broken up, she had had a suicide attempt. She had broken up with Marlon Brando. She'd been in a very popular movie and won an Academy Award. So she was also very kind of exhausted after this point. But she just started to see like the roles they're offering me are not good. And at that point, she's like, I know my worth and I'm not doing this. So she took a few roles. One of them being Night of the Following Day, which she made a movie with Marlon Brando, and she said, "I was very proud of myself. I kept that distance. I was able to keep those boundaries." She does talk about slapping him in the movie, and she said like that was basically it sounded like it was cathartic for her. She goes, "Ooh, got a lot of stuff out." She also took this time, she got married. And she also took this time to delve more into politics. She attended the March on Washington. She started to get a lot more politically active. Um, and in between that, she also started going back to theater because she's like, you know what? There may not be good roles in Hollywood, but there's good roles here. And this is something that, again, we've seen in a lot of these programs that I've done, be it Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee, be it Cicely Tyson. They're like, if Hollywood doesn't have something for me, the theater tends to be a little bit more open. But Rita actually finds a home in a place that you'd least expect, which is children's television. So she ends up joining the electric company with a big catchphrase, "Hey, you guys." Later, she goes like, "Let me tell you, school principals hated me." She is like, I was walking down the street and one person is like, "Oh, I love you. You're great in West Side Story, but I work at a school and oh my God, the kids won't stop yelling, 'Hey, you guys,' and I kind of can't stand you now." She also works on both Sesame Street and The Muppet Show, and she has a very sweet story in her memoir about begging Jim Henson for a part and even saying, "I will work for free. You don't even need to pay me." And she does end it with saying, like, Jim Henson did, in fact, pay me handsomely. Which I'm not surprised. Jim Henson seems like someone who'd make sure they pay somebody. And she also started to voice Carmen Sandiego in Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego, one of the many shows. There were at least, I think, three different Carmen Sandiego shows, and I know I watched at least two of them. And she also ended up winning, she won a Grammy for being on the Electric Company album, and she won her Emmy for Sesame Street, which gets us to earning an EGOT. So again, she's one of the few entertainers to win. As I mentioned up top, a lot of the people that win EGOTs, if you actually go to the page, a lot of them are producers, and even there's some performers where they'll win for performing role, performing role, performing role, and then as a producer. Jennifer Hudson is one of the ones to recently do that. So, where she won for performing, and then she got her Tony as a producer on a play. But Rita Moreno is one of the few to win all for acting and singing roles. So 1962, she wins for West Side Story. 73, she wins the Grammy for Electric Company. 75, for the featured actress is The Ritz. An Emmy. 77, for Sesame Street, and she won another Emmy as well. I guess the lesson here is work with the Muppets. Good things will come to you if you work with the Muppets. So she still works through the 80s. I will say this, if you're a Golden Girls fan, you probably recognized her from a season 2 episode, Empty Nest, which was a soft pilot for the show Empty Nest. But this will win you a trivia. Rita Moreno was on an episode of the Golden Girls. She would do a lot of TV, she would do movies here and there, but she was kind of thinking in the late 90s of kind of maybe not quite hanging up her career, but she was starting to look at retirement. She was getting older. She was a mother at this point. I think she might have even been a grandmother. And she was just like, oh, the roles really aren't coming. And being a Latina woman, some of the roles weren't great to begin with. Although she does talk about how she's like, it definitely got a lot better as time went on. But she was like, being an older woman in Hollywood, she's like, I had so much going against me at this point. Then she gets a call for a role in a show about a men's prison on HBO. If you are not familiar with the show Oz, it is about a penitentiary for many cases men who are in for violent crimes or in infractions. It was a very shocking show. It was shocking for its portrayal of violence. It was also shocking for its portrayal of assault in the prison system, which is a reality, and also male sexuality. Uh, in many ways, a groundbreaking show for what it had. I know a lot of people credit The Sopranos as being the show that made HBO, but there's also a lot of people who are like, yeah, well, Oz watched so The Sopranos could run. And she gets her agent going like, I don't think you're gonna like this. It's a show about a men's prison. And she goes, no, tell me. And for her, she's playing a nun, which she first kind of laughed at. She goes, really, a nun? And they're like, yeah, but she's also a therapist. And she's the heart, in many ways, one of the hearts of the show. She leads like a lot of the discussion groups. She's a shoulder for a lot of the inmates to cry on. Also, if you're a fan of Jurassic Park and Law and Order, BD Wong is in this as a priest. Also, Ernie Hudson is in this. Pre-Sopranos, Edie Falco is in this. Christopher Maloney is in this. Really, a wealth of before they really got famous actors are on this show. And for her, she's like, this revitalized her career and it made her love acting again. And one of the reasons she loved it was the reason she liked roles like Anita, where it's like she wasn't just a sexy Latina. She was able to be a well-rounded character. And she even said the show was the salvation for her career and actually got a lot of people looking at her again as a performer and going, yeah, why did we let Rita Moreno kind of fall to the wayside? She's fantastic. So in 2021, although technically they filmed this in 2019 and it was supposed to be released in 2020, and then I don't know, Todd, wasn't there some kind of a virus that hit in 2020 and we all had to stay at home?
There was
Yes, COVID
some
happened. But
complications.
Steven Spielberg wanted to remake West Side Story, and I'm gonna say at first when I heard why are they remaking West Side Story? That movie's amazing. And then I remembered, oh yeah, they put a lot of white people in that movie and put bronzer on them and said they were Latino. Okay, maybe West Side Story could be remade. Um, and actually, Rita Moreno talks about this as well. She says, like, credit to Tony Kushner and Steven Spielberg. They put in a lot of work to make sure they corrected a lot of that. Speaking to Latinos in New York City and going like, what would you like to see improved? So she decided, and she said Spielberg personally asked her to join this movie because he's like, I want you to be in this as like the legacy person. But she doesn't play Anita because basically all of the characters are the same, but she plays Valentina. And Valentina essentially takes the position that Doc had in the original musical. So she not only gets to play, again, a different character and kind of, it's legacy casting. She also, her character was married to Doc. So this is one where she has a special connection with Tony, not just because she's kind of, she employs him, she's seen him grow up, but also as the story goes on, she's like, well, Doc and I, we were in a similar situation. I'm Puerto Rican, he was white. We had a similar issue with our relationship and people not exactly accepting it. And she's able to be kind of a wise elder for him and also trying to steer him in the right way, steer him in the right direction. And she gets the song somewhere. And it's a really I love her take on it because instead of it being a more wistful and romantic song, it's almost a tragic song for her because at the point in the movie where it comes in, she just sees like after everything my husband and I went through, I would figure things would be different for the next generation. And it still isn't. Um, and I have gone to bat for the West Side Story remake since it came out. I think it's a great movie, and um, if it were up to me, either that or Drive My Car would have won Best Picture that year. But if you have not seen it, I actually think the movie as a whole is wonderful. Ariana DeBose, who does play Anita, is amazing, and it's really again. Rita Moreno was in her 80s making this movie, and she still has so much spark to her. And she's still here, like she's still being interviewed. She is still just making her mark. Her memoir was released in 2013. She was in a really good show. I think it's still on Netflix called One Day at a Time, which was a reboot of the Norman Lear movie, not movie, TV show. And she talked about work at Norman Lear because she's just like, the guy changed television. Um, Instead of it being a single mom with two kids who's white, this time it's a Cuban mother with her two kids. Rita Moreno plays the grandmother. She had her documentary come out in 2021. I believe it was originally put out with PBS, but I think that's on Netflix as well if you'd like to view it. And again, just a few years ago, she joined other legends, Jane Fonda, Sally Field, and Lily Tomlin, all legends of the 70s, by the way, for 80 for Brady, which I know there were a lot of people who were kind of like, oh, this movie looks silly, but so long story short, my mother went to see that movie and she's like, it's nice to just see a movie about older women and we're all not all just playing grandmas, where we're all going out and having fun. We have our own stories, we have our own adventures, we have our own like time and friendship with each other. And so I would say even if it's not like an Oscar-winning movie, it is important to see movies where older women get to have their own story to tell. Um, and kind of like Cicely Tyson as well, and like even at this age, she is still racking up awards. She's gotten a Peabody, she got a SAG Lifetime Achievement, she got a Medal of Freedom. She was honored at the Kennedy Center. And she is still kicking today. Again, there's something about her where I'm like, I feel like she might just outlast us all. And with that, does anyone have any questions? Um, Stop there. Alrighty. If no one has any questions, well, um, I will see everyone next month for animation at the Oscars. And again, I don't know what I'm doing for Pride Month. I'm looking at doing something about queer romance on film. The title I'm kind of playing with is Queer Romance Beyond Novelty and Tragedy. So we'll be looking at queer romances that, end nicely, essentially. But with that, I will see you all next month, and I hope everybody has a great night.
Thanks, Liz.